So now to move on to part 2 of mastering. Basically, we get the same job done as in part 1, but without using Ozone if you don't have a lot of money to spend on it. So I'm going to remove all the plugins out of this master chain and show you what it sounds like unmastered. And now I'm going to start mastering. So just like Ozone, the first step that I take is to add a multiband compressor. So I use Ableton's multiband dynamics because it works pretty well. It doesn't have 4 bands like Ozone's does, but I tend to get along fine without 4 bands. 3 bands does well enough. So I solo the lows and start with, you have to make sure you select above compression because below compression is more like expansion or gating. It's anti-compression if you like. So, I set the ratio to 4 or something like that, like I do with Ozone. And the interesting thing about this is if you actually type 4 into this box and you press enter, it's actually going to have the reciprocated number. So if you type in 4, it really means 0.5 because it's like 1/4. But wait, no, math is not working. Anyway, if I want a ratio of 4, I'm going to have to type 0.25. Like this. Okay, then I will set the threshold to something that, well, around like I did in Ozone. You'll see the average loudness where the track seems to sit, and I move the threshold to just below that. This is where your ears must work hard, and you basically have to do this by ear, so I'll just do this now. And there we go, you can see that it's compressed and made the bass a lot tighter, but the volume is dropping, as will happen with all compression dynamics things. Unlike Ozone, this doesn't have an automatic way of making up the gain, so you just have to do that yourself with these gain knobs. Again, the A-B feature comes in really handy here, so toggle the band on and off to see how your audio gain is making and try to match it to the same volume. I think that's fairly well matched. Now let's move on to the mid bands. I have slightly less compression than I do here on my bass. I might have it, say, 2. So if I type 2, it'd be 0.5, because if you work that out, if you reciprocate it, it ends up being that. Okay. There we go. Now onto the highs, same procedure, except I set the ratio a little higher, say 3 not quite 4. And if you're having trouble finding out what number you have to type in to get it, if you don't want to fiddle with the mouse, you can just go into the calculator. Your computer should have one, you know, and just type 1 divided by your target ratio. Say if I want 3.8, 1 divided by 3.8 is going to be 263, 3 significant figures, so I just type 0.263 in, and it gives me 3.8. Excellent. Now let's go. Okay, now this is completely compressed now, and we can move on to the next stage. I'll just A/B this to show you the difference it has made. It's almost made it sound mastered except quiet. And the last part to do is make sure it's just not clipping. If it is, either lower the input or go back to your mix down, make more headroom, or lower the output here. The earlier in the chain that you make headroom, the better, because it means digital overdrive is not occurring anywhere. So the next part is stereo imaging. Or actually, no, yes, stereo imaging. So I'm going to use EQ8 for this. The new, I don't know if Live 8 can do this if you use that, but if you have Live 9, it can, so you use the mode. And you have two modes. You have left and right mode. Actually 3 modes. Stereo mode, which is the normal mode, left-right mode, in which you can EQ the left and right channels independently of each other by clicking this, and this is the left channel, that's the right channel. Or you can have mid-side mode, where you can edit the information on the mono field and then the rest of the information on the side field, on the stereo field. It's kind of hard to grasp at first, but imagine if you muted the mid band, and I can show you what that sounds like by just completely low passing the mids and keeping the sides active. So it sounds like this. So as you can hear, it cut off everything that sounds like it's in the middle and left everything on the stereo. And I can do the same thing with the stereo field and show you the difference it makes. So yeah, it makes quite a big difference there. So, to accomplish the stereo widening, I don't touch the, actually I do touch these, but you could technically do it in 2 EQs, but I tend to do it all in the same EQ to just make my chain visually shorter and to minimize CPU load. So first I edit the side field. I try not to mess too much around in the bass, anything below 120 Hertz. But apart from that, I only really use 4 bands. So I turn off everything here, 3, 4, 5, 6, yep. I start with the trebles, and I'll just boost them. I do it all by ear, really. Just it depends on how much stereo information you like to hear. Excellent. And what I might do is I might set the lowish band to a low pass, so cut off all stereo information below 120 Hertz. This is the equivalent of cutting off, like, so for example, if you used Ozone, that's the equivalent of using this, and removing band 1 width all the way to negative 100%, which is taking out all stereo information below 120 Hertz. So I'll leave that there for now. Oh, I forgot to tell you, you can also use this audition mode, which is a new addition in Live 9. If you enable this mode and click and hold on any EQ band, it will solo that band out to show you what sort of changes you're making. Nope. Okay. And that might have scared you a bit. If you turn up your headphone volume very loud, not too loud that you'll die when it's turned back on, but you might be able to hear the sub-bass information in the stereo field that is being removed. That, in practicality, is garbage sound and it's not going to be used much, but I find that it does help it sound better. In some cases when you're using headphones, I'm going to leave it off. I'm going to leave the high pass here so it cuts them off and leave it like that is. Then I go back into mid mode by clicking on here, and then I actually equalize the track. Depending on what I like to hear. So I'm going to add some bass, say in the 60 Hertz region. Sounds good. Forgot to do this. I hate it when all 5 million of my devices goes off. Anyway, added some bass, might add some... There's a mosquito flying around my face. It's dead. Okay, good. Now I'm going to add some other frequencies, attenuate and accentuate ones that I think sound good. I probably should mention that the new version of EQ8 in Live 9 uses something called Adapt Q, which dynamically scales the Q, which is a measurement of resonance, based on the gain that you set. And the idea is it's meant to emulate the behavior of analog equalizers that display this because of the way electricity works and circuitry, but you can choose to turn that on and off based on what you like to hear and things like that. But the higher you push the gain, the tighter or higher the resonance or Q is going to be as well. Okay, I'm going to keep EQing. There we go. In reality, most of these adjustments that you're making, not most of them, but a lot of the really fiddly ones aren't really going to make a huge difference, so don't get too caught up on the fiddly differences. Just do what sounds good and then just leave it at that. Okay, now the next part I do is... I forgot what I did. Pretty sure it was multiband. No, it wasn't. It was tube saturation. That's right. And I use SPL twin tube, which is a external VST designed to emulate the sound of tubes, vacuum tubes. I find it works quite well. You can add harmonics and add tube saturation. And hang on, I choose to have the harmonics. You can choose which harmonics are synthesized around about here by using these switches. I turn both of them off to have the harmonics engine synthesize harmonics at around 10 kilohertz, because this is a relatively bright track and we're trying to brighten the high end of it a little bit more. It's not as precise as Ableton's multiband harmonic exciter, but you know, you can't have them all. So, just to show you what tube saturation really sounds like, this is quite an accurate implementation of it, I think. Usually you'd have to turn up the volume to maximum on tube guitar amps or something to drive the tubes hot, or make the voltage on the mains line sag a little bit so you can have the tubes distorting, but yeah, that's kind of hard to do in real world if you don't have tubes, so I just use this. So as you can hear, it's not really adding distortion because it's not peaking here, but it is adding that crunch that's characteristic to some guitar amps that use tubes. This is way overused, by the way. You don't want to turn it up to maximum ever. You want to turn it up to like no more than 8 or 10 or something when you're mastering. Basically, the idea is to just give it that analog sound that sometimes might sound better. And there we go, you can see it's made a little bit of a difference just like it has done in the Ozone video. You can really switch the order of these around in any way you want. I don't think it matters too much whether you put the stereo widening after or before tube saturation, but yeah, you can experiment with the order and see if it changes things that you like doing. Final EQing is the last step I do. So I use EQ8, and I might put an EQ curve in. But to save on that extra EQ and CPU, what I might do sometimes is move the tube saturation before the EQ that does stereo imaging, and then use the mid side bands here to the mid band to do the final EQing. Go. So I've just scooped out the mids a little bit there because the added harmonics add more volume, so I just bring the volume down a little bit to... The harmonics are still there, but the volume is less, so it barely adds a difference, but it's subconsciously noticeable, I'd like to think. There we go, that part is done. Now the part where we do the make-up compression that Ozone's Maximizer would do, you can really use any brick wall limiter you prefer. I like the FabFilter Pro L. Whoops. VSTs, FabFilter Pro L. This is quite an expensive compressor, limiter that does quite a good job as well. It's got types of algorithms here. In the advanced section, I like to use the dynamic one for mastering. With a short look ahead, default attack, and default release. And basically all you do is just move up to the gain slider. Okay, that's what I forgot. I forgot to talk about soft clipping. So right after EQ8, again, I'm going to use G-Clip, the free VST. I don't know if it's a Mac, actually. It might only support Windows, so that's bad luck if you have a Mac. You can probably use another soft clipper. There's another one out there called the T-Rax soft clipper. It's a favorite with a couple of mastering engineers, actually, and it sounds pretty good as well. G-Clip seems to do the job for me. and displays visually what it's doing as well, so that's handy. Okay. There's a part of my track there which is significantly louder than the drop. You can hear when I had the clip at 50% or something, it added too much distortion, so I moved it up to 70. And I always enable the 2x oversample so that the quality will be higher in general. The general rule is this leads to better quality, but also takes more of your CPU. You can decide whether to enable it or not based on how it sounds to you and whether you have the CPU to spare. Then you can go to Pro L, and because I added a little bit of gain here to make it easier so I don't have to push the gain up 2 million decibels, this is going to have to go up less now. So move this back to 0 and go again. There we go. And if I go really any higher than 6 decibels, it leads to compression artifacts and just over compressed sound altogether. So I'll leave it at 6, and that's as loud as I'd want it to get. And because Ozone allows you to check your RMS levels in its own VU meter, but these you don't really have a way of doing it unless your plugins do support that. So I like to use the plugin called Span from Voxengo, which is also free. You can Google it and download this, but your RMS values would just be displayed down here in the statistics window. I found the RMS value to be a little more laggy than Ozone's one, and that's because it's actually taking a cumulative sample, so it doesn't resample a bunch of averages. It just takes the average of everything you play through it from when you put it onto the track to when you delete it off the track. So everything you play through here, including silence, will be counted as RMS. So I recommend you to not to leave it silenced too long, but you might also want to use DBFS +3 metering, because that's the same system Ozone uses. So if you're wondering if this value is slightly different than Ozone's, it's probably because you don't have the same metering algorithm as Ozone's using. You could probably just do it manually in your head if you use DBFS by adding 3 to this number, but I like to just keep it simple and use that. Anyway, as you can see, that got it actually way louder than Ozone did. So if loudness is your goal, then sometimes this might be better. And as you can see, it's not a very long chain. There's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plugins in the whole chain. I don't think I'm missing anything. It's Multiband Compression, Harmonic Excitation, Stereo Imaging, EQing, Clipping, and Compression. Brick walling. Excellent. That is how you master without using Ozone, which can sometimes lead to better results. That's it, and I will end the tutorial here. Thank you for watching, and have a nice day.